Good morning and welcome to Together in God, a media ministry of Grace and St. John's Lutheran Churches. We are affiliated with the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. We are happy to share with you God's message of love and hope. Today's service is being brought to you from St. John's Lutheran Church. The church is located at 1804 Highland Avenue in Eau Claire. Please join us now in worship.
The Gospel according to Mark, the 6th chapter. Glory to you, O Lord. The apostles gathered around Jesus and told him all they had done and taught. He said to them, "Come away to a deserted place all by yourselves and rest a while." For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And they went away in the boat to a deserted place by themselves. Now many saw them going and recognized them, and they hurried there on foot from all the towns and arrived ahead of them. As he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd, and he began to teach them many things. When it grew late, his disciples came to him and said, "This is a deserted place, and the hour is now very late. Send them away so they may go into the surrounding country and villages and buy something for themselves to eat." But he answered them, "You give them something to eat." And he said to him, "Are we to go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give it to them to eat?" And he said to them, "How many loaves have you? Go and see." And when they had found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. Then he ordered them to get all the people to sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and of 50s. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and blessed and broke the loaves and gave them to his disciples to set before the people. And he divided the 2 fish among them all. And all ate and were filled, and they took up 12 baskets full of broken pieces and of the fish. The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Be seated. George Carlin had a unique perspective on an old cliche. He said, "Some people look at that and they see a glass that's half full. Other people look at that and see a glass that's half empty. I look at that and I see a glass that's twice as big as it needs to be." Today's story of the feeding of the 5,000 is reported in all 4 Gospels. That means it's absolutely central to the Christian message. But the fact that so many of us have heard it so often suggests we might do well to take a fresh look. And today I would like to look at it from the perspective of something that is bigger than it needs to be. The feeding of the 5,000 is a complex study in scarcity and abundance, and the two are often so intermixed we don't know which we're dealing with. The story begins with a huge crowd following Jesus into the barren wilderness. There are too many people in a place with too few resources. As the sun dips lower in the sky, the anxious situation turns to crisis. The people haven't eaten all day. They need food. The disciples can see only one way to avoid disaster, and that is to wash their hands of the situation. Send them away so they may go into the surrounding country and villages and buy something to eat. They solved the problem of scarcity by making it not their problem. The crowd's not their responsibility. They did not invite them out here. In fact, they were trying to get away from them. If these people go hungry, it's their own fault. But Jesus rejects that solution. No, you give them something to eat. This disturbs the disciples because what Jesus is asking is not possible given the scarcity of resources. In John's account of this same incident, Philip calculates that more than half a year's wages would not be enough to give everyone just a little bit. Andrew takes a quick inventory and reports only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. That's all he could find. And he concludes what seems to be obvious. What is that among so many? The disciples have a strong case. Resources are scarce, can't feed them all. Imagine what will happen as people grow desperate to stop the pangs of hunger. There could be a riot as people fight over what little there is. People will get hurt if we don't send them away. That's what appears to be the case. But in reality, there was far more there than anyone imagined. Jesus brought that out. The story doesn't tell us how he did it, but it does tell us why he did it. As Pastor Christine described last week, he did it because he had compassion on them. When Jesus acts in compassion, scarcity is exposed as an illusion. The message of the story for us today is that when the love of Jesus is present and active in our lives, we find we have more resources, more forgiveness, more sharing, more peace and joy than any of us realized we had. I have occasionally heard stories from a church or individual about how they found themselves in a serious shortage, and then suddenly God provided exactly what they needed. While I can accept such testimony, there's a crucial element of the feeding of the 5,000 that is missing in those stories. In this story, Jesus does not calculate the shortfall and then come up with exactly the amount required. They collected 12 baskets full of leftovers. Not only was there more available than they thought, there was more than they needed. God's grace was bigger than it needed to be. And that is characteristic of God's grace and compassion. God is neither miserly, nor thrifty, nor even efficient. God's grace and compassion are never rationed out. They are given generously and extravagantly. We are trapped today more than ever in our illusions of scarcity, and our world suffers for it. Recently, a news pundit who makes a point of proclaiming her Christian beliefs delivered this warning to the international community. The United States has only so much love to go around. That statement endorses the disciples' argument in the feeding of the 5,000. And while it may have some validity as a social critique, all I can hear is Jesus responding, "Don't give me that. You give them something to eat." We're trapped in our illusions of scarcity, and we suffer for it. Like the foolish farmer in Luke 12, who had so much wealth he did not know what to do with it. Yet his priority in life was to build a bigger barn, bigger warehouse, so he could store even more wealth. Because after all, he didn't have enough. Well, he lived in this illusion of scarcity. Surrounded by abundance, he thought he needed more and so wasted his life. I've shared with all my confirmation students over the years the story of a biology experiment that showed me why this attitude is so common. The captain of my cross-country team at Luther was a brilliant student who designed his own independent study with rats. In an era before PETA, he was able to implant an electrode in the hypothalamus of rats. That's an area of the brain known to be the center for feelings of fulfillment of desire. This electrode was hooked up to a little push bar in a cage. And every time the rat touched the bar, it would get a little jolt of euphoria. It took a few days for the rat to figure it out, but once he did, it was all over. The rat kept coming back to the bar for more with increased frequency. It became so obsessed with that little jolt of electricity that it could not focus on anything. It did not eat, it did not drink, it did not sleep. By the end, it was pressing that bar 4,000 times an hour until it literally starved itself to death, surrounded by more food and water than it needed. In a nurturing, healthy environment, the rat lived in its own world of scarcity in which it could not get what it needed to survive. Now, we humans aren't as stupid as rats, are we? Of course not. We would never do anything so ridiculous. How many billions of dollars do Americans spend on jolting the hypothalamus? The percentage of resources spent on entertainment and comfort and convenience increases every year and crowds out the things that bring life: food, water, health, education, spiritual concerns. We cut programs that provide these things for those in need, claiming we don't have any choice because we live in a world of scarcity. We blame God for not providing enough, and yet Wisconsin spends $1 billion more per year on excessive alcohol consumption than it does on higher education. Like the rat, we have created a world of scarcity in the middle of abundance. Jeff Hayden is the author of 4 business and investment titles that were #1 bestsellers. He spent most of his career rubbing shoulders with the fabulously wealthy. In an article that he wrote for Inc. magazine, Hayden said, "One day I'd like to meet someone who is, in fact, rich. Sometimes I think I found one, but I'm always wrong. Someone who can now afford a fabulous new house complains of the work needed to maintain it. A man who has just doubled his income groans because his taxes are higher. A woman who just landed her dream job is bummed because now her daily commute is a half hour longer. It seems no one I meet is actually rich, and no one is actually healthy or happy." The problem is, Hayden has been looking in the wrong place. There are many people who are actually rich, who understand they've been given more than they need. I'll introduce you to a few. Jessica Cox was born without arms. It would seem she's been shortchanged on the gifts of life, but that's not the way she sees it. Jessica is an airline pilot. She scuba dives. She has earned a black belt in Taekwondo. She pumps her own gas and can type 25 words per minute. If you ask her, she'll tell you what she has been given is more than it needed to be. Ben Underwood was diagnosed with retinal cancer at age 2, which caused the removal of his eyes. But Ben taught himself to see with an echolocation process he developed using clicking noises of his tongue. He could play basketball, ride a bike, skateboard, and play video games. Even without eyes, his vision was so acute that he could tell the difference between a trash can and a fire hydrant just by the echo of a click that returned to his ears. The cancer that cost him his eyes returned with a vengeance when Ben was 16. Doesn't it seem God gave him a very small glass in life and didn't fill it very full? Ben never saw it that way. He died the following year without an ounce of self-pity, grateful that he had been given more than enough. Liz Murray was born in the Bronx to parents who were destitute drug addicts. Both of them died of AIDS, and she ended up homeless at the age of 15, owning virtually nothing. But what appeared to be scarcity was an illusion. With the help of a scholarship from the New York Times, she earned admittance to Harvard and recently graduated. With just a little compassion from the outside, her world turned into an abundant place. There are days when all we can see is scarcity. There's so much need and want in the world, so much hunger, disease, and poverty, so much warfare, violence, and suffering. We feel there's nothing we can do. We don't have the resources to cope with it. All we have is 5 loaves of bread and 2 small fishes, and what is that among so many? But then we're treated to a modern-day version of the feeding of the 5,000. I'm talking about the Wild Boars soccer team in Thailand, who found themselves trapped in a cave by swiftly rising monsoon waters, leaving them with virtually no resources. No food, no light, no warmth, no sanitary conditions. Trapped more than a mile underneath the surface in an area so remote it had not been mapped in 70 years. No cell phone, no GPS service, cut off by miles of underground currents raging through narrow, winding passageways that would tax the strongest and most experienced divers in the world. I can hear the disciples looking at this disaster and saying, there aren't enough resources in the world to find them, much less rescue them. Besides, they got themselves into this mess. It's not our problem. But somehow the Thai people heard the call, you get them something to eat. When compassion is unleashed, it turns out that what appeared to be scarcity is abundance like we have never seen. Thousands of people arrived to search for the boys. Busload after busload. More than 2,000 soldiers came to assist, even though it seemed likely the boys would never be found, much less found alive. And when they did locate them and discovered it was a desperate race against time to save them, people from all over the world threw themselves into the effort. More than 200 of the most expert cave divers in the world flew in from England, Australia, China, Finland, Denmark, and other countries to join the Thai SEALs. Representatives from 200 government agencies, including the United States, pitched in. Volunteers streamed in to cook meals, operate pumps, and provide medical assistance. Together, in a model of global cooperation almost unconceivable in this era of strife and division, they did the impossible. Battling darkness, cold water, and powerful currents, the divers fought through grueling 11-hour trips to rescue the team, and they got every one of the trapped children out alive. Everyone said it was a miracle, and it was. A miracle proving that spurred by compassion, we find far more resources in the world than we ever knew were there. Given what happened there, how is it even possible that we allow any child in the world to go to bed hungry or homeless, claiming we just don't have enough to do anything about it? It's all been exposed as an illusion. God did not abandon us in a world of scarcity. We have been given far more than there needs to be. Far more than we need on this planet to feed every person, to provide decent health care for everyone, to eradicate disease, poverty, and war in this world. The resources are here. True followers of Christ are more important to God's creation than ever because this world needs someone to explode the myth of scarcity in the world. When voices around us say we cannot afford to feed the hungry, educate the children, house the homeless, protect the refugee, rebuild shattered lives, save and protect the environment, provide health care for every person, we can be the people who say, no, God has not created a world of scarcity. That's an illusion of our making. We live in a world of abundance if we would just conquer our fear and open our hearts to see it. The world needs us more than ever to tell the story of the feeding of the 5,000, to proclaim the truth that there was far more in our world than meets the eye, and that compassion can inspire us to tap into our immense resources to put this world back together. Here we thought we had only a handful of crusty loaves of bread and a couple of fish. Not nearly enough to do the job. The love of Jesus appears among us and breaks into our hearts and changes who we are and how we think and act. And suddenly we find we have all the resources we need to meet ends. More than we need. They were here all along. We just got caught up in the anxiety and self-centeredness that blinded us to that fact. Jesus did not engineer this miracle to impress or awe anyone. He was well aware that in doing what he did, he would only exacerbate the problem he had with the masses hounding him, favor seekers stalking him, people trying to make him king. But he took on the burden because people were in need of food. People were in need of healing. People were in need of life. And so he gave it to them. Because that's what God is all about. Sharing, healing, loving, giving life. The feeding of the 5,000 is a story of compassion coming into the world and exposing our fears as an illusion, that when we follow the gospel message, we recognize that we live in a world filled with God's riches. To all of my friends in the St. John's faith community, whom I've had the privilege of spending the last 9.5 years, I leave you with this. Never forget that God's love and grace are far bigger than they need to be. And as long as you remain a river of compassion for the world, you will continue to experience that time and time again. God bless you. Amen.
Let us pray. Gracious God, we thank you for the work and witness of your servants Nate and Linda, who have enriched St. John's and shared their gifts here. Now bless and preserve them at this time of transition. Day by day, guide them and give them what is needed. Friends to cheer their way and a clear vision of that to which you are calling them now. By your Holy Spirit be present in their pilgrimage, that they may travel with the one who is the way, the truth, and the life, Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
If you could remain where you are, Pastor Nate is going to do the blessing.
God bless and keep you always. May your wishes all come true. May you always do for others and let others do for you. May you build a ladder to the stars and climb on every rung. And may you stay forever young. And the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord's face shine on you and be gracious unto you. The Lord look upon you with favor and give you peace. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Thank you for being a part of Together in God, brought to you today by St. John's Lutheran Church. Your prayers and financial support are always deeply appreciated, and the hand of fellowship and ministry is extended to you. St. John's holds services on Sunday mornings at 8:15 and 10 a.m., and on Monday evening at 7 p.m. Please tune in again next Sunday at 10:30 a.m. Until we meet again, may God bless you.